For tens of thousands in Dresden late last night, memories of grief and loss, as church bells rang out in a clamorous requiem for those killed in the bombing 50 years ago. Most now accept it as the brutal consequence of Hitler's war against Europe, yet still see it as a slaughter of the innocents. The area bombing of Dresden by British and American planes created a terrible firestorm that brought the death toll, mainly of civilians, to 35,000. And some British visitors to Dresden say it's now time to say sorry.
I do believe that it is time. And what I'm going to say is something in the nature of an expression of our deep sorrow and regret beyond words for what was experienced here.
The Duke of Kent, a cousin of the Queen, has the task of expressing regret for Dresden's agony while staying true to the memory of over 50,000 British airmen in Bomber Command who died. In reconciliation, the Duke will hand over plans for a Golden Cross from Britain to help rebuild the ruined Church of Our Lady. German leaders are reaching out to Britain too, pledging that the lessons of the wartime past are beyond question.
The Nazi Germany started the war and brought destruction and death to many people all over in Europe. We can only beg for reconciliation.
A bitter lesson of today's events, including the wreath laying at this cemetery, is that both sides did cruel things in times of war. German and British leaders are now determined to put aside old feelings of hostility. Today will be a test of whether they can carry their people with them. William Horsley, BBC News, Dresden.
The chief Palestinian negotiating
chamber could house a Scottish Parliament. That's Labour's promise, supported by the Liberal Democrats. It's not enough for the Nationalists. But Labour's George Robertson made a personal commitment.
I believe we are setting up a major institution, a new Parliament for Scotland.
Right,
and I would be proud to be a member of this Parliament.
The SNP leader, Alex Salmond, would take part in a Scottish Parliament too, but only as a stepping stone to independence. He said Labour wouldn't give it real power.
It would leave the commanding heights not just of the Scottish economy, but of Scottish democracy itself. They still would be left in London.
The Conservatives weren't involved in the devolution independence debate. They've described it as a playoff for second place.
This was a debate from which both the Labour Party and the SNP will claim to have won political points. The clearest outcome, though, is that the arguments were aired. Arguments for devolution and Scottish independence, which could be a central part of the next general election campaign. Colin Blaine, BBC News, Edinburgh.
And viewers in Scotland can see the debate in full.
Attacks on London. It was against this backdrop that the decision was made to bomb Dresden.
A special day and a special requiem in Dresden for the victims in war of Allied bombs, the prayer that they may find eternal peace. 50 years ago, Dresden burned with what seemed like hellfire. The most ruthless punishment of Hitler's Germany hit a city centre packed with women, children, refugees and wounded. British Lancasters, which opened the attack, dropped incendiary bombs. More British and American planes followed. Below, a giant firestorm took hold. By next day, some 35,000 were dead, and Dresden's architectural treasures lay in ruins.
Funeral piles were here, and all the bodies were brought. They put them day by day with carts with little horses stuck all on top of each other, and they never burned.
Erika Wollums was 20 then, a Dresden air defense warden. Her street was destroyed, but she escaped to the bank of the Elbe River. Today, visiting Dresden from her home in England, her voice of accusation is as strong as ever.
It wasn't just a straightforward bombing, it was setting people alight, killing them by the most vile ways. How can you justify that with women and children, our priests, with all their families, the best people of the town? How can you say that's not a war crime?
A few days before the Dresden raid, Stalin pressed at Yalta for more help on the Eastern Front. The horrors of Auschwitz have been discovered. V-2 rockets were hitting England. Churchill put aside his qualms and ordered more indiscriminate bombing of big East German cities. The head of Bomber Command, Sir Arthur Harris, now had a free hand to put Dresden on the list of targets.
Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everybody else and nobody was going to bomb them. They sowed the wind, and now they are going to reap the whirlwind.
After 50 years of peace, the erection of a statue of Sir Arthur Bomber Harris in London just 3 years ago brought protests in Britain and Germany. But to men like Alan Goldby, who took part in the bombing of Dresden, there's no question of Britain apologising now.
It was a terrible war. The whole of Europe was involved. And I think the whole of Europe really became rather brutalised by it all. What would today seem a terrible thing, in those days, I suppose, was taken as, well, c'est la guerre, part of the war.
An old soldier still in Dresden, Horst Milder, walks back each year to the hospital where he survived the bombing. To him, evacuated from the crumbling Western Front, it felt there was no escape from the Allies' overwhelming firepower.
It fell down the whole side from the roof till to the bottom, and we had in the cellar also thought, now it is our finish. We wait for the death.
Milder retraces the steps he took, dragging a wounded leg to a nearby bunker. To him, Harris, who directed the attack, was, like himself, doing his duty as a soldier.
He was a general like each other, like Montgomery, like the German generals. It's only different. You are the victory side, and we are the loser.
All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Father, forgive.
Through the church, this anniversary has brought representatives of Germany and Britain closer than ever before. Canon Paul Österreicher of Coventry, the cathedral city destroyed by German bombs, read the Coventry Litany with nuns of Dresden's Deaconess Hospital, devastated exactly 50 years ago.
The covetous desires of people and nations to possess what is not their own. Father, forgive.
These German sisters had the wartime task of tending the wounded fighters of Hitler's Reich. They've put the past behind. But for Paul Österreicher, the time is ripe for new gestures of atonement.
The British policy, the Allied policy, of deliberately killing as many civilians as possible. To do that deliberately in the hope of demoralizing Germany, it didn't work in practice. It was also immoral in fact. And I wish we could recognize that and say so in so many words.
Dresden today bears its soul. The Duke of Kent with the German president will walk through the cemetery whose stones bear witness to the millions who died at Nazi hands. Only after that will they lay wreaths at the memorial to those killed by the Allied bombs. When leading British figures pay their respects to the victims of the bombing here, it'll be a gesture many Germans have long waited for. This city has made clear the war guilt lies with Nazi Germany. Despite the bitterness, true reconciliation may now have a better chance. William Horsley, BBC News, Dresden.